Good stuff. Thanks very much, everyone who's jumped on this webinar. Just looking at some of the names there, I think it's going to be morning, evening, or potentially very early for some of you. And if that's you, I hope you have a strong cup of coffee beside you. My name's Andy Hovey. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Starboard Maritime Intelligence. And I'm joined here with George.
Yeah, good morning, Andy. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is George DeVries. I am the Product Management Director at S&P Global for all of our maritime risk and compliance suite of tools. I've been with the company for just over 3 years, very potted history previous to that. I'm an ex-Royal Navy officer, spent just shy of 8 years in the Royal Navy conducting anti-piracy, anti-smuggling, anti-narcotics interdiction operations, as well as IUU fishing operations within our fishery protection squadrons. And since leaving the Royal Navy, I've worked for a couple of shipping companies as safety and security inspector before finding myself with S&P. So very happy to be on this call, very excited about what Andy and the team are going to be showing you, what excellent job Starboard have been doing with some of the actionable intelligence and data sets we're able to provide. And I look forward to filling you in about that in a little bit. And I'll hand you back to Andy.
Thanks, George. I always feel a little bit intimidated when people bust out a CV like that. I get to say I've spent a long amount of time building software for lots of people. And so it's kind of a good example of our collaboration of bringing expertise with excellent software to bear for analysts, a lot of you on this call. So yeah, this is about discussing the collaboration between S&P Global Market Intelligence and Starboard to blend an incredibly rich data set about the maritime world, about vessel information in particular, ownership information, with the analytics and other data sources in Starboard. So before we crack into that, I want to kind of talk about 3 things. 1, questions. We love questions. So there's an area, you should be able to see it in Zoom, called Q&A. If you drop any questions in there, if you want to be anonymous, you can tick that box and remain anonymous. We'll do our best to answer them live. Otherwise, they'll be answered in the chat. And if there's anything that we don't cover, we'll be able to follow up with folks if you email us later on. The second thing we want to do is just acknowledge that there's just a bunch of really excellent work in this space already to do with kind of blending analytics and information. That's done privately, done in governments. It informs enforcement activity. It's done by NGOs. It's changes policy in a positive direction, and a lot of it's really influenced us. And what we're here to do is not necessarily write new reports. We want to, and we are building tools with you, with analysts for you, and really taking that information into global real-time insights, not particular reports or particular insights into individual vessels. We're here to make the software that allows you to do the awesome work that you do. So by way of illustrating this, I'm going to talk about one particular use case and then work backwards to the behavioral and insights, the behavioral insights and the ownership insights related to this vessel. So Sunflower 7 is a South Korean fish carrier that was fairly recently denied port use in Thailand. It had $7 million of tuna on board. And this event came about through a combination of expert analysis conducted in Starboard by Francesco Blaha and other experts. And then this information was checked and checked again, and then shared with the Thai authorities and the Environmental Justice Foundation. And then Thailand acted swiftly and decisively to deny the port use. And then the vessel has returned to South Korea and subsequently returned to the Pacific. And in South Korea, it was fined $150,000. So there's a couple of things that are really interesting about this from a behavioral aspect. You can see on the left-hand side here is a letter from the Thai authorities noting that its tracking, so the movement of the vessel, indicated several large course deviations, potentially engaging in unauthorized fish aggregation device deployment, commonly known as FADs. So probably many of you know this, but a FAD is something that's deployed by fishing vessels in its simplest form to attract the attention of fish, and then more and more fish are attracted to this floating object, and then other fishing vessels come by and scoop these fish up. In the case of Sunflower 7, this vessel was not licensed to deploy FADs within the area that it was fishing, the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission Convention area. And there are two things that are really important on this slide. One, the assertion that it was deploying FADs, and two, the comments from the captain that they considered that they were collecting, or they stated they were collecting floating objects from the sea. And then down the bottom here is a photo actually taken by a customer of Starboard that they sent to us of Sunflower 7. I'm going to jump over to go, what did that actually look like? So here, I'm jumping over to Sunflower 7 in Starboard. And you can see what I'm looking at here is the past year of activity. For those of you not familiar with Starboard, I'll just give a very quick run through. Everything that you're looking at in Starboard responds to the timeline that you have set across the top here and any kind of related filters. Any activity that you're looking at can be moved through time with the time slider down the bottom here. Any information about the vessel or analysis in the area is covered on the left here. So there's a couple of interesting things that I want to talk about related to the Sunflower 7. The first is its license status. So I can see that there's registrations on 3 different regional fishery management organizations. The relevant ones here are the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission and the Fisheries Forum Agency. And I can click into this license and I can see the details of the license. I can see information about it, and as we'll cover a little bit more later on, information about the owner and the crew and the captain, and a little bit of information about the crew size, and I can correlate that information with the FFA. So that gives a little bit of context. What are they allowed to do? Where are they allowed to do it? In terms of the behavior, you can see here quite clearly that there is this fairly consistent geometric pattern right here. And so one of the ways we can interrogate movement in Starboard is by clicking on the track, and I can zoom in and interrogate it. But one of the other ways that's really great for recording a key event like this is that over here I can see that a tag's been added to this vessel, and some notes have been added to this tag. And so one of these notes, I've added this for the purposes of this demo, is a blog from Francesco Blaha, who, as far as I can tell, is a bottomless knowledge of maritime domain awareness and fisheries information. And the second one I've tagged is a link directly to the information or the behavior that we're interested in. And this is a great way of annotating information and recording it. And so what I've done is I've just clicked on this link, and it's taken me exactly to the relevant time frame and the area of activity, and I've drawn these circles to highlight the areas that we're particularly interested in. So the first thing that we can do is move this vessel through time, and there's a key event that happens at the turning of this vessel, that everything that we flag in Starboard, we always want an analyst to be able to go through and visually interrogate the information. If the information is flagged by an algorithm, visually interrogating the port visit, the encounter, the data gap is an important way of building trust in the data. So over on the left here, I can see its orientation and speed. And you can see that the speed stays fairly consistent through this turn. And so the chances of being able to collect a buoy at sea on a vessel that's maintaining a consistent speed would be very, very difficult. Fortunately, the maritime expert in George is nodding his head on this call at that moment. And the other thing that's really interesting here, and we need to check, is the oceanographic context. Maybe there was wild conditions, but in looking at that, we can see that no, the wind was coming at a reasonable 13 knots from the east. And again, everything in Starboard shows me the sea surface temperature, the wind and the waves in the context of the vessel. And then the last thing we want to look at and go, well, maybe it was avoiding other vessels, maybe there was a reason. And if we look at the other vessels nearby, we can see that there is not an obvious reason for this vessel to be making the pattern that it is. It's not really possible to pick up buoys with that speed. The oceanographic information doesn't suggest anything, and the vessels nearby don't necessarily indicate its need to do this. In terms of the vessels nearby, I can see a summary of what's going on. I can see that there are a bunch of longliners and so on and so forth in the vicinity. So what does all this mean? And how does this relate to behavior, and how does this relate to companies and fleets? So I'm going to zoom out a little bit from the individual example that I was just talking about and talk a little bit about what we were just looking at. What is Starboard? Starboard is, in essence, kind of a combination of data sources that we process with a whole number of algorithms and models to help analysts identify vessels of interest, vessels that require further investigation. And so taking the example of Sunflower 7, the incoming data sources that we were using were AIS data. We were using oceanographic information of a variety of types to provide context on the activity. And we were looking at regional fishery management organization information, which gave us, are they allowed to do this activity that they're doing? And more information about who owns it. You can see here that I've pulled out this one here, which is the S&P vessel information, which is what we'll go on to talk a kind of a bunch more about. And I might hand over to George to talk about how that is so rich.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, and cracking example to start off what I think is going to unfold as an even more interesting discussion as we dive deeper into Starboard and into the examples you've got to give. So I think it's worth taking a moment just to throttle back a little bit. And for those that don't know what S&P do within the maritime space, obviously a lot of people will be aware of S&P as a financial ratings authority. That's where the company cuts its teeth. However, a couple of years ago, they acquired IHS Markit, which was my old company. Well, it's not my personal company, it's the company I was working for before I get any delusions of grandeur. And through a very strange quirk of history, we have retained the right to issue RMO numbers on behalf of the RMO sanctioned by the UN. We are the only company in the world that does that. And so that puts us at a very unique position to be able to go to flag states, to vessel owners, and get absolutely certified data. So if I just talk through sort of the slide left to right, as it were, as you can see that it's very important that the data that we push out is verified, is certified, and it does. I mean, there is a huge amount that can be provided through OSINT, through wedge scraping, etc. We do a little bit of that, but really what we rely on fundamentally is official government agencies, port state control authorities, coast guards, etc., flag states, to give us their official data. This enables us to maintain the RMO numbering system. It enables us to ensure that flags are maintaining their admin correct. We undertake an annual tonnage assessments each year on behalf of the UN to maintain and go out to flags to say if vessels are potentially false flagging, etc. So the data comes directly from those sources. We don't have to go ask for it. It is pushed to us, which puts us in a very unique position. And because we get that data, for example, sanctions data, most of the official government data is updated daily within our system. And then we can push it to people such as Starboard via an API on a call frame that they are happy with. And for Starboard, it's all pushed on an hourly basis. Obviously, we do get an awful lot of data in. As you can see there in our center column, we have 600 unique fields on each individual vessel, over 200,000 vessels. So that's all vessels that require an RMO number over 100 gross tons. And also we're able to therefore look not only at the vessel, not only at its inspection history, not only at its characteristics to help Andy and his team sort of highlight any potential fishing vessels or reefers that are engaged in sort of ship-to-ship activity, but also we're able to look at the ownership, which sometimes can be convoluted and very strange in some of the levels that they're pulled together. So all of that is sort of fact checked. It's run through fuzzy logic programs, and it's also manually tracked by a team of over 100 personnel that we have within company to ensure that the data that we're pushing out is correct, is up to date, and helps products such as Starboard to push out their data blended to allow operators to make an informed decision. So I hope that gives you an idea of where we come into the mix as S&P to help Starboard make such a wonderful and informative product. And Andy, I'm sure this is going to bear fruit as we go through further examples. So thank you, and obviously very happy to take any questions later in the program.
Awesome, thanks, George. Yeah, I mean, probably implicit in the way we're talking and what we're showing here. I think we're both pretty excited about the potential of what we can do together. If we were to try and sum up everything that we're doing in a nutshell, call it a slide even, we'd probably do it something like this. And so, you know, together we're collating the unique, and George did an awesome job of talking about this. It really is a Herculean task to get accurate information from the source. And so we're collating this unique global data, and we're turning it into valuable insights about the maritime world. And so on the left-hand side, essentially what we're taking is the raw vessel positions. In this case, we're talking about AIS data. And then in the middle, we're turning that into essentially a pattern of life for every vessel in the world. I'm not going to go too much into this because we're mostly going to talk about the right-hand side of this. But essentially, all of those algorithms and models are detecting key events in a vessel's history. Some simple, like a port visit, other more complex, like an anomalous movement. And then when there are customers that work with assets or information from other sources, we're bringing in those photographs and information and correlating that. And then what we get off the back of that is this very rich activity history for a vessel. And then we're taking that, and in partnership with S&P, we're marrying that with the off-water information. And so, you know, we generally think about the world in two ways. This information, which we think of as off-water, and this information as we think of as on-water. And so who's the beneficial owner? Who's the registered owner? Who's operating this fishing vessel? It's the 7 levels of ownership that George just spoke through. And then we're looking at, in the case here, we've been talking about a fish carrier. And so that's, who did they likely deliver fish to? Where did they get the fish from? And where did they get fuel from? Which bunkering vessel is supporting them, which may be important for an investigation. And so I'm going to jump back into Starboard with this kind of company hat and lens on. And so we're back where we were, and I'm looking at the Sunflower 7 again. I can see now it's moved on slightly from the last location we looked at it. That location's a few minutes ago. And on the left-hand side here, I can see that the group owner is Jishung Shipping. I'm really sorry to anyone that speaks Korean because I know that's terrible pronunciation. So this is the first level of information that we're bringing in from S&P. And so if I look at these 11 vessels on the map, you recall that the information, or not the information, the movement that we were particularly interested in before took place around about here. And I can still see, indeed, here is the geometric pattern of the Sunflower 7. I can still see in mid-November its pattern of movement where it wasn't slowing. But what's really interesting about this is not the Sunflower 7, but this other vessel here that I can see is Lake Dream. And so this is another vessel that's owned by the same company. It has the same registrations across the WCPFC and the FFA, and it has a pattern of movement that looks consistent with the pattern of movement we've observed in Sunflower 7. And also, if we move through time And again, keeping an eye on the movement and the speed and the changes of orientation, we see this very clear geometric pattern happening on the high seas or crossing over a boundary in the high seas area of the WCPFC. And so the first level of value is simply being able to go, is the pattern of behavior endemic across a fleet? And that fleet could be made up of, in this case, beneficial owner. It could be made up of other information or attributes that come from S&P. And then visualizing it in Starboard and blending it with, you can see a bunch of these icons which are noting anomalous movements, encounters at sea, and visually being able to identify outlying activity like the FAD deployment that we've seen in Sunflower 7 is incredibly valuable for analysts. So I'm going to jump back and go, what if we looked at what's coming for a vessel report of Sunflower 7? I've seen the behavior, I've seen a little bit of information about the company information, but how does that relate to what I am interested in? And how are we blending the on-water and off-water information? So I can see at the top here, any information that's in my organization that could be related to a current investigation or ongoing alerts. I can see I'm interested if the Sunflower 7 enters a WCPFC high seas pocket. I can see any tags that I've added. I get a summary of its behavior. How long has it been at port and sea? Who's it met with? Are there any missing AIS data, anomalous movements, fishing registrations, risk indicators, which I'm sure we'll cover in a bunch of detail in a future webinar, which is something that's coming very soon. And then here looking at the owner and operator information. So in this case with Sunflower 7, it's actually relatively straightforward compared to what we're seeing in some very complex, particularly cross-nation or cross-flag state ownership structures. And then I can start to see which companies are related through behavior. So I can see that it likely served as a fish carrier for this organization. And then I can go on and see where was that fish landed. And in some cases, we needed to note, in some cases, we need to note that there's missing AIS data, and you don't necessarily independently or from AIS rather know the landed location. And then again, seeing where it received fuel, in this case from the optimistically named Success Global Holding Company. And so what we're doing here, we've got this clear owner-operator structure and then on-water relationships. And then we're starting to compare this activity in port visits, both in a fishing sense and a broader maritime domain awareness sense. So the Port State Measures Agreement is an international agreement that supports effective inspections of fishing vessels in port, and the Corruption Perception Index is an indicator of public sector corruption. And so we enable you to see which is the most visited port, where's its port of registry, and then check back this vessel's history. Again, any vessels that this vessel has encountered with, the type of those vessels, any tags or personal or customer, personal information that I've added to this, and then the track history and an extensive amount of vessel details that comes through from S&P. So this is looking at an individual vessel report. Where it gets particularly tricky is when you want to look at a company or not just a company, but a group of vessels that you're tracking that may be related to a collection of shark finning or other activity that you see at sea that may not necessarily form under a clear flag state or a company, and you want to be able to look at the relationships between a group of vessels. We've seen this from a bunch of customers who, frankly, some of their analysis work is absolutely incredible. They're pulling multiple sources together, and they're usually working in this sort of chaotic spreadsheet, which is highlighting the crossover information. There's often a working document going on, and maybe this document will get condensed, and maybe that'll be given to a port inspector, or maybe that'll go to someone who's going to conduct an inspection and board at sea. often what we see is they have about 10 million tabs of vessel information open. They're working with something like MERS. You can see here, Starboard, probably information coming from Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, depending on the nature of the investigation, probably using some Aquasis information in there. And also, there's inevitably some random sketches going on as they're trying to work out, did this vessel work with this other vessel? Is this important? Is this not important? And it really is a blending of on-water and off-water information. And we've had some pretty interesting calls where it really feels like customers are trapped in this meme that has somehow got larger than the show itself. But it really does feel like this sometimes when you're trying to track vast activity across the maritime world, both on water and off water. And so if we cut back to how we're trying to calm the chaos a little bit, this is essentially what we are looking at. This is the parent company, the beneficial owner of Sunflower 7. And so now I'm not just looking at vessel information for an individual vessel, but a group of vessels, in this case, a company, or it could be a group of tagged vessels, enabling me to do this bespoke analysis. I can see there's 11 vessels in the fleet. I can see that they're South Korean. I can see the fleet activity and risk. This is across all vessels in the fleet. I can see the registration across all vessels. I can see where this company's relationships lie. And again, in this instance, it's a fairly straightforward company structure. Where it gets really interesting is when we start blending this behavioral on-water and off-water information at a company level. So I can see that this company likely served as a fish carrier for this group of companies together. And we know that from S&P data that these companies are actually subsidiaries or they share forwarding addresses. And so they're actually the same group of companies. And then I can see additional relationships with other vessels at sea that are not spending as much time, and the same for receiving fuel. In fleet activity, it's the same principle, but I'm looking at which ports routinely work with this company or this fleet. And again, I can look across the whole fleet and see risk indicators or tags that may be relevant to me or my investigation at this point in time. And then additional information about the company, address details, so on and so forth. Where all this is going is that we're seamlessly blending, yes, the behavioral information, yes, the S&P information and vessel report, but we want to be able to work with this both geospatially and in reports. And so you can use this in your own risk model, you can use this in your own risk analysis. And on the right-hand side, we won't go through every single one at this point here, but you can see that they're combining behavioral insights like likely high seas transshipments, which are coming from Starboard, with information that's coming from S&P, looking at things like beneficial ownership changes in the last 90 days, IMO registration details and AIS broadcast mismatches, and then using additional information that comes from other sources like the EU. Does this flag state hold a yellow card or another card from the EU? And then combining additional external data sources like we've talked about with the Port State Measures Agreement to flag visits to ports not party to it, or registration status. I'm going to pause there so we can maybe answer a few questions live, or give a little bit of space there, George, if you want to talk about anything or pick up anything on that.
No, I think you set out the stall wonderfully there, Andy, about how our data is used within your products and the partnership that we're going through. We're trying to provide actual insights, especially into the world of IUU. I have been keeping a watching brief on the questions, and I know our team behind the scenes has been doing a sterling job on answering a few of them. The couple of the latter ones that have come in, one from a Mr. Al Wilson. I don't know, he's asking us about the data sources used. I don't know if we wanted to unpack that a little bit more. I can certainly talk around where we get most of our data from, and then so Hanno, back over to you, Andy, to talk further on your side. So for us, as I say, we are the issuing authority for the RFMO number. So and also there was a question earlier on about other lists and vessels that don't have RFMO numbers. Because we do speak directly to every single flag state, at least on an annual basis. 90% of them are much more regularly, at least a monthly basis. We have information on every single vessel that flag flags. So obviously with the RFMO numbering, we are beholden to retain a lot more information. But for any vessel that's flagged that has an MOSI, so a Marine Mobile Service Identifier, and has a VHF radio or any kind of radio on it, we can hold various bits of information. The additional information we receive from, as I said earlier, sort of port state control authorities, sanctioned bodies such as OFAC, UN Security Council, EU, the Majesty's Foreign and Commonwealth Office here in the UK. And we do a various bit of open source scraping when it comes to looking at companies and looking at address checks. So one of the things you did touch upon was the fact that we can look at companies more in the round, so not just the one company, but also look at her address and see if there is any dual addressing or companies that are all somewhat linked and all share the same address and parts like that. There was another question about the ability to show networks of company registrations and interactions. We can certainly provide those for companies. And I can see Kelly has just jumped in there, so she's going to answer that question. So I'll leave that there. So I hope, Mr. Wilson, that sort of covers it from an S&P perspective. I'm very happy to take that offline at any other stage. And Andy, I'll come back to you, sir, to talk about your additional sources.
Yeah, so there's one question there about the data sources used. So you can see on the left-hand side here, these are the groups of data sources that we use. So the first one, as you see, is kind of to be filled in by customers, basically. And so we, by design, are a data agnostic platform. And so some of our customers are adding in information. I talked briefly about information from assets. Other customers maintain an incident database, and then we feed that incident database into Starboard, and then that is placed through space and time. So that's kind of from a customer level. Then the next level is we're bringing in AIS information, which we bring in from S&P also, and that comes from three sources. So there's satellite information, and so in the case of the Pacific and Sunflower 7, predominantly those locations are received by satellite. And then the second level is vessel AIS, and so that's receivers that are placed, AIS receivers that are placed on cargo vessels. This is particularly helpful, I would say critical, even in very busy areas of the world. And we see that the dominant AIS source used in these areas is vessel information, or vessel-based AIS. And then the third one is terrestrial receivers. And so these are blended in tracks and Starboard. And if I turn on AIS data points, you can see exactly when the point was received, the location and the timestamp. In this case, it's a satellite-based receiver because it's in the middle of the Pacific. And then the next level that we bring in is research from organizations and official lists, like we've talked about sanctions lists, the OFAC sanctions list, but there's also research from independent NGOs that we bring in, and that allows analysts to compare independent research, government research, behavioral insights, really to get a complete picture of who's talking about the vessel. And then the next level that we're talking about is, and we've talked most about, is the S&P vessel database, which George illustrated the accuracy of that before. We're bringing in oceanographic information, sea state, sea surface temperature, and wind. And then we also work with a bunch of additional satellite data. So you can briefly see this image on the right here, which is working with additional synthetic aperture radar data. And we correlate that with either information from assets or predominantly vessel locations on AIS to detect non-reporting vessels. So that is kind of the core of the data sources. There was another question about tying multiple vessel histories, including infractions, across ownership levels, which is an awesome question. So one of the things that we're doing with reliable IMO numbers across and through time rather, is tying all of the vessel histories to an identifiable IMO number, which is tied to an ownership structure. And that means that you'll see flag states and details of the vessel change, but we're tying it back to that authoritative record that's coming from S&P, and then looking at the beneficial ownership. And those beneficial ownership changes are tracked through time also. And so we'll be flagging that event in a vessel's history, just like, for example, if I look at any vessel, I can track back all of its activity and correlate that to a timestamp and a location. Information about changes in beneficial ownership and other key information will come into a vessel's track history. There's a question here around indicators of forced labor risks. This is a really tricky area, and it's actually the same as kind of general areas on identifying illegal activity remotely. Our approach to this is to use risk indicators because it's easy to oversimplify a very complex problem, and there are some important indicators like duration at sea, but they need to be coupled with, and that's one of the reasons that we always flag duration at sea, but they need to be correlated with other information to make a strong assertion, essentially. Yeah, there's a question here about establishing a sort of a fleet hub, like an international post office, to increase efficiency together with data intelligence. And I think that what is interesting about the Sunflower 7 is the effectiveness that came from international collaboration across experts and the Thai authorities and NGOs. And I think a big part of the value that we see is supporting that conversation, enabling that conversation. And that's a big part of, like, when I showed the information before and adding information in here, so I can see, here's a note, here's a link to a blog, being able to support that conversation. We absolutely think that this helps achieve the outcome that we all want to see, which is a reduction in illegal fishing and nefarious activities at sea. I'm just a little bit conscious on time, and I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. Sorry to be looking down a little bit. There's a lot of questions coming in, which is totally awesome, and I think we're getting to a few of them. What I might do there is I might stop sharing my screen and might just wrap up for a second and let folks get back on with their day. The last thing I would say is, we've talked a lot in this demonstration about illegal fishing and about the Sunflower 7 case, but the maritime domain world is complex and intermingled, to say the least. And so a lot of these risk indicators that we're talking about, like duration at sea, like meetings at sea, like changes in beneficial ownership, like changes in beneficial ownership en route, these are relevant to security, these are relevant to the broader maritime domain awareness industry. And so, yeah, we're focused initially on further developing these risk indicators, bringing in the information from S&P. And we focus today on an individual use case to talk about, but there is absolutely kind of broader applicability in everything that we're discussing here. The last thing I'll say from me before I hand over to George to do a final wrap up is thanks for joining. Thanks for asking a bunch of questions, and we'll have those questions in the recorded webinar, and we'll make the link available. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the presentation, to be able to talk about our partnership and where we're looking to be going, and the insights we're looking to provide to the MDA community. Completely echo what you've just said in regards to, yes, we have just highlighted IUU today. I think it's an area of concern, it's a growing area of concern, and it's something we should all be alive to. But I think that those that do operate in the space, in the MDA space, should definitely see applicability of these data sets to wider MDA sort of investigations, pattern of life analysis, and further investigations. And yeah, again, just thank you for allowing S&P to be part of this presentation, for allowing us to highlight our data sets and those that you're using. And yeah, very, very much welcome any questions further in the chat, so we can discuss further. So thank you ever so much, everyone, for your time. In regards to time zones, thank you for making the time, the effort to attend. Thank you for the engagement, and for those watching on demand, as it were, to plug a UK sort of system. Again, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Our contact details are available on the slides. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for attending.
Last one.